Why was she the only one still standing in the rain? The others had scattered after the briefing. Maps folded, radios checked, silence pressed into the mud. But she lingered, boots rooted, eyes locked on the horizon as if it were holding something from her. Her name was Captain Alina Voss, 32, Army intelligence officer, embedded with a unit that wasn't entirely hers. And though they respected her credentials, she carried a reputation like a shadow, half whispered, half doubted. They thought she was too careful, too watchful, too unwilling to bend to the rhythm of their recklessness. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew what she carried inside. She drew in a breath, cold and sharp, the scent of wet earth and diesel clinging to it. Her hand adjusted the strap of her rifle across her chest, more from habit than necessity. Rain tapped against her helmet, steady like a metronome counting down time. And inside her chest, a weight pressed, a secret that had followed her from briefing to battlefield, one she hadn't spoken aloud, not even here. The night before, she had stared at the ceiling of her tent, hearing distant gunfire like a storm at the edge of the world. She thought of her brother, Nathan, younger by 3 years, killed on a mission that had gone wrong, led by a commander who had rushed when patience was needed. That mistake had painted her worldview in permanent ink. And yet here she was, surrounded by men and women who believed that charging forward was the only proof of courage. "Captain," the voice snapped her back. A sergeant, older, weary lines under his eyes, stood waiting with a radio slung at his side. "We're moving in 5. You coming, or you planning to write poetry in the rain?" His tone wasn't cruel, it was survival humor, but it stung. She forced a half-smile, nodded, and fell into step. The convoy rumbled to life. Engines low, armored wheels pressing grooves into the mud. Inside, the squad jostled with every bump, their chatter blending with static on the comms. Someone cracked a joke about home, about fast food and the taste of freedom. Someone else laughed too loud, masking their nerves. Alina didn't laugh. She pressed her back against the cold metal wall and watched their faces. The medic, young, freckles across his nose, still pretending he wasn't terrified. The gunner, eyes always scanning, fingers twitching as if rehearsing moves. And the lieutenant, their leader, a man who wore confidence like armor, too thick, too polished. Her stomach tightened. Something about tonight didn't sit right. The coordinates, the timing, the way intelligence had come in too clean, too quick. She had seen this before when her brother's unit had walked into a trap. But she said nothing, not yet. Because speaking meant being dismissed, again, and she could not endure another set of rolled eyes. Another muttered, "She's paranoid." Not when she needed their trust most. Instead, she listened. The hum of the engine, the distant thunder, the way silence crept in whenever laughter faded. Her hands were steady, her mind was not. The convoy slowed. Someone tapped the metal frame of the vehicle twice, signaled to dismount. Boots hit the ground. Rain still falling, heavier now, masking movement, smearing shadows. The compound waited ahead. From a distance, it looked like bones, broken walls, shattered roofs, pieces of a skeleton left behind. Official reports had called it abandoned, empty, forgotten. But something about its silence felt intentional, as if someone had pulled the curtains shut and waited for guests to walk through the door. The lieutenant raised his fist. Standard sweep, tight formation, in and out. And just like that, they moved. The first wall was easy, breached with a bolt cutter, hinges squealing before the gate sagged open. They slid through, rifles raised, every bootstep measured. Inside, the air was colder, stale, carrying the tang of old smoke and rust. Alina's eyes darted across broken windows, doors ajar. Every corner felt like a stage, every shadow like an audience holding its breath. The medic whispered, "This place gives me the creeps." "Stay sharp," someone muttered. They pushed deeper. One room after another cleared too fast, declared all clear before anyone really looked. Alina noticed it, how the lieutenant's voice carried a tone of impatience, as if he wanted to prove there was nothing to fear. But then she heard it. A sound, faint, a scrape. Not natural, not the kind of echo a building makes on its own. She froze, every muscle tightening. Her eyes flicked toward the source, a closed door at the end of the hall. She lifted a hand, signaling, but before she could say anything, the lieutenant waved her off. Nothing, just rats. His tone dismissed it, too quick, too final. Her chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to demand caution, but she could feel the weight of the squad's eyes on her, already expecting her to cry wolf. And so she let it go. They moved past the door, past the warning. The air grew heavier, thicker. The hum of a single light bulb overhead buzzed, flickering weakly. Alina's throat felt dry, though the rain outside still clung to her uniform. Every step sounded too loud, as though the building itself was amplifying their presence. Then it came. A vibration underfoot, subtle then sharper, a low thud, another. Her gut clenched, too late. The explosion ripped through the corridor, fire and debris swallowing the world. The floor shook, walls split. A deafening roar filled her ears. She slammed against the wall, vision sparking white. Screams, shouts, the sharp crack of rifles, shadows moved through smoke. Alina's training took over. She crawled, dragging herself and another soldier away from the collapsing section. His vest was slick with blood, his breathing ragged. She pressed her hand to the wound, whispered without knowing if he could hear, "Stay with me." The compound erupted into chaos. Figures emerged from the smoke, enemy fighters, silhouettes sharp against flame. Gunfire burst, deafening, the smell of cordite thick in her lungs. She ducked behind a broken pillar, heart slamming, rifle pressed to her shoulder. Her ears still rang, the world muffled, but her mind cut through one truth. She had known. She had felt it. And she had said nothing. Now the field was turning red, and the guilt clawed at her chest like a physical thing. But underneath the weight, another force ignited, a defiance that refused to die. Not again. Not Nathan. Her breathing steadied, not from calm but from resolve. She would not let this unit fall because she stayed silent. The rain outside beat harder, tapping like drums of war. Firelight painted the walls. Dust hung in the air like fog. Alina rose from cover, eyes narrowing. Not reckless, not desperate, but clear, determined. If the field demanded blood tonight, she would answer with something greater, unyielding spirit. And somewhere in the chaos, she swore she could almost hear her brother's voice, steady and quiet, reminding her, "Don't freeze, Alina. Don't let them write your silence into history." She gripped her rifle tighter and stepped forward into the fire. She steadied her breathing, but the smoke kept clawing into her lungs. Every inhale scraped like sandpaper. Every exhale felt too loud. The building groaned around her, fractured by fire and concussion. The field had turned red, and now she had no choice but to move through it. A shadow stumbled out of the haze. Private Keenan, the medic, blood streaked down one side of his face. He clutched his aid bag like a lifeline. His eyes met hers, wide, terrified. "Captain, what do we do?" His voice cracked. He wasn't asking as a soldier. He was asking as a kid who just stepped into hell. Alina swallowed the lump in her throat. She wanted to say she didn't know, that she'd failed them already, that she'd felt this coming and had stayed silent. But leadership wasn't about what she felt. It was about what they needed. "Get your kit open. Start patching whoever you can. Don't stop moving." Her tone was steady, even as her heart thundered. Keenan nodded, knelt beside the nearest wounded man. Hands trembling, but he worked. Gunfire cracked again, sharp and close. Alina whipped her head toward it. The lieutenant was there, crouched behind cover, shouting orders into the radio that only spat static back at him. His confidence looked cracked now, his face pale, jaw tight. "Captain," he barked, spotting her. "We need to push out, can't hold this position." She scanned the chaos. Fighters were closing in from multiple angles, Their timing was perfect, too perfect. Her suspicion confirmed this had been staged, a lure, a message. But what gnawed at her wasn't the trap, it was her silence. A memory seared across her mind, unwanted. Nathan's last letter. She had read it 100 times, memorized every word. I don't blame anyone, Lena. We all thought it was clear. Sometimes the silence before a storm feels just like peace. Her brother had trusted silence. She never would again. She shouted over the roar. "Lieutenant, if we push blind, we'll run into more of them. We hold until we know where the gap is." He glared, indecision flashing in his eyes. His pride hated her voice cutting through his command. But his instincts, his survival, knew she was right. Another explosion ripped through the far wall, showering them with debris. Screams again. One of their squad, Rodriguez, clutched his leg, blood pumping between his fingers. Alina dropped beside him. "Pressure here," she told him, pressing his own hand tighter to the wound. His eyes watered not from pain but from fear. "I've got a kid at home," he whispered, voice breaking. He's only 6. Her chest twisted. She wanted to promise he'd see his son again, but promises were fragile here. So she met his gaze and said instead, "Then you fight with me. You hear? You fight for him right now." Something steadied in his eyes, not peace, but defiance. She rose again, rifle ready, scanning through the dust. The enemy shapes darted in and out, shadows with fire in their hands. She squeezed the trigger, each shot measured, controlled. Not rage, precision. Keenan dragged another wounded soldier behind cover, blood staining his uniform darker with every movement. His hands shook, but he didn't stop. She saw him mutter something under his breath, maybe prayer, maybe pleading. It didn't matter. His humanity clung to every word. The lieutenant slammed his radio against the wall, cursing. "No comms, they're jamming us." Alina's mind clicked. Jamming meant preparation. Preparation meant this wasn't random. They had been studied, anticipated. "Why?" Her stomach knotted. She felt the weight of something larger pressing against the edges of this night, but she couldn't reach for it now. Survival came first. A lull fell, brief but sharp, like the battlefield itself had inhaled. Gunfire paused. Smoke shifted with the wind. She seized it. "We move on my mark. West corridor narrow, fewer entry points. We'll hold there." The lieutenant started to protest, but one look at the wounded piling around them shut him down. His voice came smaller this time. "Move." They dragged, lifted, staggered down the corridor. Keenan's aid bag clattered against the ground. Rodriguez groaned, limping with 2 others supporting him. Every sound echoed, boots slapping, gear rattling, breath gasping. The west corridor was dark, the ceiling lower, walls scarred by time. It felt like stepping into the lungs of the compound itself, tight, suffocating. But it was cover. They formed a hasty perimeter. Alina crouched, rifle angled, pulse heavy but steady. She counted. 7 able-bodied, 4 wounded, 2 critical. Too many to move fast, too few to hold long. The lieutenant's face shone with sweat grime streaking his cheek. He leaned close, voice low. "We can't sit here forever. What's your play, Captain?" Her play, the word struck hard. He was finally asking, not ordering, because the field had forced humility on him. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied the shadows ahead, the way the smoke drifted in faint currents, the faint sound of movement beyond the walls. Her brother's voice came back again, as if drawn from memory into the present. "Don't freeze, Alina. Don't wait for someone else to choose." She tightened her grip on the rifle. "We wait for their push, use the choke point, buy time. Then we break through in one strike, no second chances." The lieutenant hesitated, then nodded. His confidence had bled into her defiance. Minutes crawled. Each second stretched thin, drawn taut by fear. The wounded whimpered, Keenan whispering soft words he probably didn't believe himself. Rodriguez clutched at a photo pulled from his vest, his son's face blurred by blood. Alina closed her eyes briefly, listening to the silence. She thought of Nathan again, his laugh, his stubborn optimism. He would have hated this waiting. He would have wanted to charge. But she was Nathan. She couldn't be. And then it came. Footsteps, dozens, echoing closer, boots heavy against stone, voices murmuring, sharp, foreign. The sound swelled until the corridor itself seemed to vibrate. Alina raised her hand. Every soldier froze, breaths caught. Then the first enemy stepped through the smoke, and the corridor lit up with fire. Rifles spat, shadows fell, echoes shattered. Alina squeezed the trigger, one shot at a time, each breath timed, each heartbeat measured. She felt the kick against her shoulder, the heat rising, the sting of powder in her eyes. The choke point worked. The enemy funneled in, trapped by their own momentum. But numbers pressed, bodies surged, the tide unrelenting. Beside her, the lieutenant fired until his magazine clicked dry. He reloaded with shaking hands, cursing under his breath. Keenan pulled one of the wounded back as bullets sparked too close. His face was streaked with blood, not his own, and his eyes burned with something past fear. Resolve. For a moment, just a moment, Alina felt it. Not hope, not safety, but unity. Fragile, desperate, human. Then she saw it. A figure in the back, not fighting, watching, giving hand signals. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't random chaos. This was orchestrated, controlled. Someone wanted them alive long enough to bleed but not to die. Why? The question clawed at her, louder than the gunfire. She fired again, dropping one more. Her pulse roared, her throat burned. The field was red, her spirit unscarred, and in the center of the storm she knew one truth. This night wasn't about survival alone. It was about meaning, about what her silence had cost. And she would not let it cost them all. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it began. Not because the enemy had vanished, but because they wanted it to. The silence was worse than the bullets. It stretched out, heavy, unnatural. Dust hung in the air like fog, lit orange by smoldering debris. The squad pressed their backs against the corridor walls, chests heaving, rifles trembling in tired hands. Alina kept her sights up, finger resting against the trigger, but her instincts screamed louder than her training. This wasn't a retreat. It was a recalibration. She whispered into the dark, more to herself than anyone. They're testing us. The lieutenant caught it. What? They're not trying to wipe us out, not yet. She adjusted her grip, jaw tight. They're probing, hurting us. His frown was sharp, sweat dripping down his cheek. He wanted to dismiss her again, she could see it, but the pile of wounded behind them made denial impossible. Keenan's voice broke through, panicked. We've got to move, Captain. They'll box us in if we stay. His hands were slick with blood as he tried to stop Rodriguez's leg wound from spilling more life into the floor. The kid's freckles were smeared, his uniform soaked, his eyes glassy. Rodriguez groaned, clutching the photo of his son tighter. His whisper scraped like sandpaper. Please, don't let me die here. Alina's chest tightened. She wanted to tell him no one would, but she couldn't lie, she could only fight. She scanned the corridor. One way blocked, the other narrowing into darkness. The compound was a maze, but it had to lead out. It always did. The trick was finding the exit before the enemy decided it was time to close the jaws. The lieutenant leaned close, voice low, urgent. We push east, less resistance. I saw an opening when we came in. Her gut twisted. East was the wrong way. It went deeper into the compound, deeper into control. But west had already bled them. This was the choice. Risk another trap or risk the unknown. Her brother's voice flickered in her mind again like static. Don't freeze, Alina. Pick a direction or the world will pick for you. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them. We go east, but we don't scatter, we stay tight, and we move fast. The lieutenant hesitated, then nodded. He gave the signal. They lifted the wounded, weapons shifting to cover. Boots splashed through puddles of blood and rain leaking from the broken ceiling. Every sound echoed. Every shadow seemed to lean closer. The east corridor stretched long and narrow, lined with half-collapsed walls and shattered doors. It smelled of mold, smoke, and iron. Elena's senses sharpened to razor edge. She counted steps, breaths, the faint hum of power lines still alive somewhere in the bones of the building. Then voices, ahead, murmured, deliberate, the kind of sound made by men who weren't panicked, who knew exactly what they were doing. She signaled halt. The squad froze. Her pulse drummed in her ears. She edged forward, peering through the crack of a broken doorway. There they were, half a dozen figures armed, waiting, positioned with precision. Not patrol, not accident, ambush again. Her throat tightened. The corridor was narrowing. They were being funneled into a kill box. Her silence had cost them once. She would not stay silent again. She turned back, voice steady but sharp. Set smoke. Now, if we push clean, we're dead. The lieutenant's eyes widened. For the first time tonight, he didn't argue. He snapped his fingers, and one of the squad yanked a canister from his belt. The hiss filled the air. White smoke bled into the corridor, curling like ghostly hands, swallowing sightlines. The enemy shouted, caught off guard. Move, Elena barked. They surged forward, carrying the wounded, rifles raised, firing into the haze. Muzzles flashed, bodies stumbled. Bullets cracked past, thudding into stone. Elena led the charge, eyes burning from the smoke, lungs raw. Her boots pounded the floor, her heart hammering with each step. She fired where shadows shifted, every squeeze of the trigger a vow. They would not die here. They broke through the enemy line, stumbling into a wider chamber. Dust and smoke trailed behind them, the echoes of chaos clinging to their backs. Then silence again, but different this time, heavier, intentional. The chamber was wrong, too open, too empty. A single light flickered above, swaying on a wire, casting warped shadows across the cracked concrete. Keenan's breathing was ragged. He dropped to his knees beside Rodriguez, pulling fresh gauze with shaking hands. I can't stop it, he whispered. His freckles stood out stark against his pale skin. Rodriguez's lips moved faintly. Tell my boy, his voice broke. Elena knelt beside him, hand pressing to his shoulder. Her eyes burned, throat tight. You tell him yourself, you're not done yet. But even as she said it, she felt the cold truth under her palm, the slowing pulse, the shallow breath. Rodriguez's eyes locked on hers, not angry, not pleading, just tired, and then still. Keenan sobbed, muffling it into his sleeve. The sound pierced sharper than the gunfire had. Elena swallowed hard. She wanted to scream, to punch the concrete, to demand why her silence kept costing lives. But there was no time. The field did not pause for grief. The lieutenant's voice cut through, hoarse. Captain, look. She followed his gaze. On the far wall of the chamber, painted in crude, dripping strokes of red, a symbol stood out against the cracked concrete. Not graffiti, a mark. A circle, broken by a single slash. Her stomach twisted. She knew it. She'd seen it once, buried in intelligence reports. A faction no one admitted existed. Shadow soldiers, ghost operators, groups that didn't fight for land but for leverage, for messages. They hadn't stumbled into an enemy stronghold. They'd been brought here. Her blood chilled. This wasn't just about killing a squad. It was about showing the world something, sending proof. The field wasn't random tonight. It was theater. She stepped closer to the wall, fingertips brushing the rough paint. Still tacky, fresh. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried. We're not their target, we're the stage. The lieutenant stared at her, eyes dark. Then what the hell are we supposed to do? She turned back to the squad, faces pale, uniforms soaked in blood and sweat, eyes hollowed by fear and loss. Keenan wiping his face, the others clutching rifles too tightly. Her heart clenched. She saw Nathan in all of them, young, hopeful, unprepared for the cruelty of silence. Her voice came steady, anchored by something deeper than orders. We survive. We drag their stage down around them. And when we walk out, we do it carrying every name they thought they could bury here. The silence after her words wasn't empty. It was belief, fragile, flickering, but alive. Then the echoes returned. Footsteps, voices, the enemy closing in again, ready for the next act. Elena raised her rifle, her jaw set. The field had turned red, but her spirit remained unscarred. And she carried the weight of defiance in her chest like a weapon sharper than any bullet. Why did silence feel heavier than the sound of gunfire? She sat there, her back against a cold concrete wall, her breath slowing only because she forced it to. The night pressed in, a suffocating blanket of shadow and unseen threats. Around her, the team whispered in hushed tones, voices fractured by fatigue, but she didn't join in. Her mind was elsewhere, half in the room, half in the past. Her hands trembled once briefly, but she hid them inside her sleeves. She couldn't let them see. They already thought she was too quiet, too inward, too distant from the brotherhood they all clung to. She could almost hear the questions lingering in their silence. Can she hold? Will she break? But the truth was, she had already broken, just not in ways they could see. The memory returned without permission. A kitchen table, the faint smell of coffee, the sound of her father's voice, raspy but steady. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Maya," he had said. She hadn't answered then. She couldn't. Because deep down she believed the opposite. She believed she had everything to prove to herself, to him, to the ghosts that refused to let her sleep. A sudden sound snapped her back. A metal clink, too close, every head lifted, every breath stopped. The sergeant gestured sharply, a hand slicing the air. Silence deepened. Her rifle was already in her hands before she realized she had moved. The barrel rested against her shoulder, her cheek pressed against cold steel, her finger steady. Waiting. The noise didn't return. Perhaps it was nothing, perhaps it was everything. Minutes stretched, and in those minutes the weight in her chest thickened. She realized how little she feared death itself. What she feared was the judgment before it, the possibility of failing, of being remembered not as strong but as the one who faltered. "Stay sharp," the sergeant muttered finally. The others nodded, tension thinning but never vanishing. When the team shifted to rest, she didn't. She sat awake, her eyes locked on the darkness outside. She couldn't let herself drift, not when her heartbeat still echoed in her ears. And that's when he spoke, the man sitting just a few feet away, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. "You always this quiet?" It was Ramirez. Older, lines etched across his face, the kind of man who wore both strength and sorrow in equal measure. She hesitated before answering. "Depends," she whispered back. "On what?" She exhaled slowly. "On whether talking helps." A faint smirk ghosted his lips. He leaned back, shoulders pressing into the wall. "Talking doesn't help, trust me. Been here long enough to know." The silence stretched again, but this time it was different, less suffocating, more shared. Finally he said, "You remind me of someone, my sister. She was stubborn like you, quiet too, thought she had to carry everything alone." He paused, his jaw tightening. "She didn't make it." The words lingered, heavy. She looked at him, really looked, and realized what he was offering wasn't pity. It was warning. She nodded once, not in agreement, not in dismissal, just in acknowledgement. The night dragged on, each second another test of patience and endurance. By dawn, their orders shifted. They were to move through the ruins, closer to the heart of the city, closer to where the whispers of resistance and betrayal merged into something dangerous. The streets were narrow, lined with crumbled walls and shattered windows. Every shadow felt alive. Every silence felt like bait. She took point for part of the walk, her boots crunching softly over broken glass. Her eyes scanned rooftops, her ears tuned to echoes. And though her body moved with training, her mind warred with itself. What was she really doing here? Was it loyalty, duty, or was it revenge dressed up as sacrifice? Her brother's face flashed again in her thoughts. That crooked grin. That stubborn voice insisting he'd be fine. She had believed him, even as the news arrived weeks later, sealing the truth in black ink and folded flags. Her grip tightened on her weapon. If she ever faltered, she told herself, it wouldn't be today. Halfway through the sector, the team paused. The sergeant raised a fist, halting the line. He crouched, studying the ground ahead. Then he pointed wires, thin, almost invisible, stretched low across the street. A trap. Her stomach dropped. They rerouted, slipping into a side alley. But the alley was worse. Narrow, boxed in, flanked by walls that seemed to whisper. She hated it instantly. And then it happened. A voice, small, weak, a child's voice. "Help!" Everyone froze. The sound came from inside a collapsed building, somewhere in the shadows. The sergeant's jaw clenched. He gestured for silence, but the word was already there, hanging in the air, impossible to ignore. She looked at him, then at Ramirez, then back toward the rubble. Her heart beat harder, louder. What if it was real? What if someone was trapped? But what if it was? The conflict split her in two. The soldier in her screamed caution, screamed trap, but the human in her, the sister, the daughter, the girl who had once believed in mercy, ached to step forward. Her breath caught. "Stay sharp," the sergeant muttered again, eyes locked on the rubble. He wasn't moving, he wasn't risking it. But she couldn't look away, that voice, that one fragile word. Her chest burned. She whispered, "What if it's real?" The sergeant didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. Ramirez's eyes met hers, tired but steady. He shook his head once, just once. Her hands trembled. Her mind spiraled. And for the first time since the mission began, she wasn't sure if she could live with either choice. If she moved, she might doom them all. If she didn't, she might doom herself. The decision hung there, unspoken, like the weight of 1,000 battles pressing on her shoulders. And for one fleeting moment, she wondered if this was the real war, not against an enemy with weapons, but against herself. What if the sound of innocence was the cruelest weapon of all? She froze, her body taut, her breath shallow, the echo of that fragile voice unraveling every defense she had built. Help. Just one word, but it cut deeper than shrapnel, tearing her in two. The sergeant's hand stayed raised, his expression stone. He wasn't moving. The team waited, uneasy, like statues pressed against ruined walls. Only their eyes flicked between her, the rubble, and the man who gave orders. She whispered again, her voice barely audible, "What if it's real?" No one answered. But silence wasn't neutral. Silence was a choice. Her grip on the rifle felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Her mind looped through scenarios, the bait of a hidden ambush, the bloody aftermath of carelessness. But another thought kept intruding. A child's face. Wide eyes, fragile limbs, the kind that would never survive a world like this without someone to reach for them. Her brother's laugh slipped into memory, unbidden. That time he lifted her onto his shoulders at a county fair, his voice teasing, "Don't look down, just keep your eyes forward, May." He had carried her weight effortlessly like it was nothing, and now was she about to turn away from carrying someone else? Ramirez shifted beside her, whispering low, gravel in his tone, "Don't, it's not worth it." She turned her head slightly, catching his gaze. He wasn't angry, he was afraid, not of the child, but of what would happen if her heart won this battle. Her heart was winning anyway. She moved just a step. The sergeant's eyes locked on her, sharp as steel. His jaw clenched, but before he could bark, she whispered, "Cover me." The team stiffened. No one wanted to break discipline, but no one could deny her conviction either. It bled through her posture, her tone, the way her rifle tilted toward the shadows. The sergeant's fist lowered at last. He didn't give permission. He didn't need to. His silence was surrender. She slipped forward, one careful step at a time, her body low, her senses on fire. Each crunch of broken stone under her boots sounded like thunder in her ears. Her breath was measured, but her pulse betrayed her, fast, frantic, human. The rubble loomed closer. She saw the slant of a broken wall, the jagged teeth of collapsed beams, the hollow space where dust swirled in muted sunlight. And then, again. Help! Softer now, weaker. Her stomach tightened. She edged closer, her barrel sweeping the dark, her shoulder brushing against rough stone. And then she saw it. A figure small, half buried under debris, an arm sticking out pale against gray dust, fingers twitching. Her throat constricted, it was real. She signaled back with a sharp hand, and the team shifted, covering angles, barrels tracking every opening. She crouched low, setting her rifle aside long enough to grip the edge of a splintered beam. Her muscles strained as she pulled, the wood groaning against weight and gravity. The child whimpered. Her breath caught again. She remembered the nights after her brother's death, the way she had curled into silence, waiting for someone to lift the weight crushing her chest. No one had. She had carried it alone, but this child didn't have to, not if she could do something now. The beam gave way with a crack, dust rising in a choking cloud. She coughed, squinting through grit, then slid her arms beneath the frail body. The child was light, too light, as if starvation had carved hollows where strength should have been. Tiny eyes blinked up at her, barely conscious. A girl, maybe 6, maybe younger. "You're safe," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if the words were true. The moment was fragile, almost sacred, and then a sound. Click. Not from her, not from the child, from the shadow behind the rubble. Her stomach dropped. She twisted, instinct faster than thought, yanking her weapon back into her hands as a figure emerged. Armed, face hardened, the bait had worked. Shouts erupted. Gunfire cracked. The team moved instantly, unleashing controlled bursts. The air filled with chaos, echoes bouncing off stone, debris splintering, the acrid sting of powder filling every breath. She dropped low, shielding the child with her body, pressing against the wall as bullets chewed into the air around them. The girl whimpered, clutching at her sleeve with tiny, desperate fingers. Her chest burned. This wasn't a mistake, not yet, not if she could make it mean something. "Move," the sergeant barked, voice raw through the gunfire. She rose, clutching the child against her chest with one arm, her rifle gripped in the other. Her steps were uneven, fast, desperate as she scrambled back toward the team's line. Bullets spat sparks at her feet, walls erupting with chips of stone. Ramirez surged forward, covering her retreat, his weapon roaring in short bursts. "Go, I've got you." Her boots slammed against broken ground as she pushed through, heart hammering, breath ragged. She stumbled once, knees slamming into gravel, but she didn't let go. She couldn't. The sergeant grabbed her arm as she crossed into cover, yanking her behind a shattered wall. "You nearly got us killed," he shouted over the chaos, eyes blazing. She didn't answer. She just pressed the trembling child into his arms. The sergeant froze. For one heartbeat, too, his expression shifted. His jaw clenched, his grip tightening around the frail body. And then, without another word, he signaled the team to regroup. They fought their way out, pushing back through alleys, their formation fractured but unbroken. The gunfire faded behind them, replaced by ringing silence and the ragged sound of their breathing. When they finally stopped, hearts still pounding, the sergeant set the child down gently against a wall. She was weak but alive. The team stared at her, not with admiration, not with resentment, with something heavier, something complicated. She sat back, her chest rising and falling, her hands shaking in her lap. Her mind spun between guilt and defiance, between fear and quiet pride. She had risked everything, for what? A single child, a fragile life in a sea of violence. But wasn't that the point? Ramirez crouched beside her, his voice low. "You're out of your damn mind," he said, then softer, "but I get it." Her eyes burned, but no tears fell. She couldn't afford them. Not here, not yet. The sergeant finally spoke, his voice gruff. That can't happen again, not like that, not without orders. She nodded once, not in agreement, not in apology, just acknowledgement. But inside, a quiet truth stirred. If faced with the choice again, she wasn't sure she'd do anything differently. As the sun dipped lower, painting the ruined streets in muted gold, she sat with the child leaning against her side, small fingers still tangled in her sleeve. The weight of defiance was heavy, but it was hers to carry. And as silence stretched, she realized something new. Sometimes dignity wasn't about survival. Sometimes it was about refusing to walk past what others ignored. Why did the silence after survival feel heavier than the fight itself? The gunfire had faded hours ago, but the echoes lingered, clinging to walls and bones like smoke. The team huddled inside a half-collapsed building, dust hanging in shafts of pale light. No one spoke at first. Words would have only deepened the fractures. She sat near the child who slept now curled beneath a blanket that wasn't hers. The small chest rose and fell, shallow but steady. Every breath was proof the risk had been worth it, or at least that's what she told herself. But when she looked up, she felt their eyes on her, watching, weighing, judging. The sergeant paced by the doorway, jaw locked, every step sharp against the concrete. His silence wasn't indifference. It was fury contained, waiting for the right crack to spill out. Ramirez sat opposite her, arms draped across his knees, his gaze not harsh but heavy. Others avoided her eyes altogether, focusing on their weapons, their boots, the walls. Anywhere but her. She pressed her palms together, steadying the tremor in her fingers. The adrenaline had drained away, leaving her with a body that felt both too heavy and too fragile. Her lungs pulled in air, but each breath carried a weight she couldn't shake. The sergeant finally stopped packing. His voice cut the room. We don't survive missions by following our hearts. We survive by following orders. His words landed like stones. She met his gaze. If I hadn't moved. You don't get it. He stepped closer, his tone razor-edged. It's not about her. It's about all of us. You gambled with lives that aren't yours to gamble. The child stirred faintly in sleep, a small sound that splintered the silence. She glanced down, then back up, her throat tight. She's alive. That has to count for something. The sergeant's jaw worked. It counts for nothing if we don't make it out. The room felt colder after his words, as if hope itself had been pushed aside. She wanted to argue, to say that survival without humanity wasn't survival at all, but her voice faltered. The truth was, she wasn't entirely sure where the line was anymore. Ramirez finally spoke, his tone low, steady. She made a call. Wrong or right, she'll carry it. His eyes shifted to her, not condemning, not excusing, just real. But you don't need to keep tearing into her. We've got bigger things to face than each other. The sergeant didn't respond. He turned away, staring into the broken doorway, his silence sharper than any words. The others slowly shifted into rest, weapons laid close, heads leaned back against cracked walls. But rest didn't come easy. The air was thick with tension, the kind that seeped into lungs and bones, the kind that made silence scream louder than noise. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, the moment replayed, the voice, the rubble, the twitching hand, and the click. That sound, the enemy waiting just beyond mercy. It haunted her, because maybe the sergeant was right. Maybe her defiance had almost destroyed them. But then her mind returned to the child, fingers gripping her sleeve in desperation. That small weight in her arms, that fragile trust. Could she have walked away? No, not then, not ever. She pulled her knees close, resting her forehead against them, hiding the burn in her eyes. The memory of her brother surfaced again, sharper this time. His voice in their kitchen the night before deployment. Promise me one thing, May. Don't lose yourself out there. She had promised, but she wasn't sure anymore if keeping it meant obeying or defying. Hours stretched into an uneasy dawn. The sky outside was pale gray, clouds heavy with the threat of rain. When the team stirred, there was no banter, no camaraderie, just quiet efficiency. They packed, checked weapons, moved out. The child walked beside her, too weak to keep up, so she carried her again, small arms clinging to her neck. Each step with that weight pressed deeper into her muscles, but she welcomed the ache. It was a reminder, a reason. The streets were emptier now, but the silence felt deceptive, like something coiled beneath it. Every shattered window seemed to hold eyes. Every corner felt like an ambush waiting to breathe. They stopped at an old fountain, long dry, the stone cracked and overgrown. The sergeant signaled for rest. She sat on the edge, setting the child down gently beside her. The girl opened her eyes faintly and whispered, "Are you a soldier?" The words were soft, almost lost in the wind. She hesitated, something like that. The child blinked slowly. "My mom said soldiers protect people. Do you?" The question lodged in her chest, simple, innocent, but piercing. She wanted to answer yes, to believe it, but the field turning red in her memory said otherwise. "I try," she whispered at last. The girl nodded once, weak but trusting, before her eyes fluttered shut again. She sat there staring at the child's face, the dirt streaked across it, the fragile line of her jaw. And she thought of all the promises soldiers made and all the ones they broke. Her mind drifted back further to the letter folded in her pack. She hadn't read it in months, not since the day it arrived. Her brother's handwriting, uneven but clear. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. But don't let the world change who you are. Don't let the field take your spirit. Carry it, no matter how heavy." She swallowed hard, blinking away the sting in her eyes. His words had felt impossible when she first read them. Now they felt like chains and wings all at once. A sudden sound cracked the stillness, distant at first, then closer, vehicles, heavy engines rolling over broken stone. The sergeant's hand shot up. The team snapped into readiness, weapons raised, eyes scanning. Her pulse quickened. The child pressed against her side, sensing danger without understanding it. The engines grew louder, closer. A convoy, enemy or ally, there was no certainty. The sergeant hissed, "Move now." They slipped from the fountain, melting into alley shadows. She clutched the child close again, each step a silent prayer. But inside, beneath fear and duty, a thought lingered. Maybe the sergeant was right. Maybe she had doomed them all. Or maybe, just maybe, she had saved them from something worse, losing themselves entirely. Why did the sound of engines make her stomach twist tighter than any gunfire? They had been moving through the ruins for hours, shadows stretching across cracked streets, every step measured. The convoy's hum grew steadily louder, a mechanical heartbeat in the stillness. She pressed the child closer, feeling the fragile weight against her chest, her own body tense with instinct. Every muscle coiled, every nerve screamed. The sergeant signaled a halt. The team crouched, rifles up, scanning alleyways and shattered windows. Faces were tight, eyes narrow. The tension was palpable. The child's small hand pressed against her neck, warm but trembling. Ramirez leaned close. "This could be a trap," he whispered. His voice was low but certain. "They know we're here. Everything we've done, every choice we've made, it's been leading to this." Her jaw clenched. She thought of the rubble, the whispered voice of the child, the choices she'd made to save lives at the cost of discipline. Leading to this. The convoy emerged finally, metal beasts rolling over stone and debris, engines growling. Trucks and armored vehicles, the kind that could flatten a building without effort. Shadows of men inside, armed and alert, faces unreadable behind visors. The sergeant cursed under his breath. "We need to move, flank them or they'll cut us off." Elena's mind raced. The streets offered no cover, no flank. Open ground stretched ahead. A direct push would be suicide. But something else flickered at the edge of her perception. A narrow side street, almost invisible, tucked behind rubble and broken walls. If they could reach it, maybe. "Here," she murmured, pointing. We divert narrow streets, less open, we can force them to funnel. The lieutenant shook his head, anger flashing. That's a gamble. Open streets are our only chance to move fast. She didn't answer. Not yet. She couldn't afford hesitation, not now. Ramirez looked at her, reading the decision in her posture. He nodded slowly. Do it. We follow. The team moved, silent and precise. The child clutched her sleeve, eyes wide, sensing danger without understanding it. As they turned into the narrow street, the convoy's engines roared louder, metal grinding against debris. Soldiers inside the vehicles shouted commands, their voices distorted by distance and armor. Her heart pounded. The air smelled of exhaust, heat, and dust. She felt the vibrations of metal against stone, felt it through her boots, through her chest. Then gunfire. The first shot cracked against the wall beside her, ricocheting sparks. The convoy had spotted them. Move, move, the sergeant yelled. The team surged forward, weapons firing in controlled bursts, each shot aimed to suppress, not kill indiscriminately. Alina held the child with one arm, rifle in the other, firing from the hip as they sprinted. Her lungs burned, but she forced herself to stay steady. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat was measured. The convoy's lead vehicle swerved, crushing a pile of rubble, sparks flying. Bullets thudded against the walls, some striking too close for comfort. Keep moving, Alina shouted over the chaos. Ramirez covered the rear, dragging back an injured squad member, his hands steady despite exhaustion. He fired repeatedly, a wall of defiance shielding them from immediate danger. The narrow street twisted sharply, funneling the convoy into a tighter space. She realized then this was their advantage. The vehicles couldn't maneuver freely. They were slowed. Her mind clicked. Precision, timing, coordination, not brute force. That was always the way she survived. That was always the way she carried the weight of defiance. She signaled to the team. The wounded were moved to the inner side of the alley, shields provided by walls and debris. The child pressed against her side, half asleep, trusting, fragile. A sudden explosion rocked the street ahead. Dust and debris sprayed in a violent arc. She stumbled but caught herself, eyes scanning. A disabled vehicle blocked part of the convoy, wheels twisted, engine smoking. The enemy scrambled, trying to clear the obstruction, but she and her team were already exploiting it. Short, controlled bursts fired into suppressive positions. Shadows shifted, enemy soldiers fell or ducked, their coordination disrupted. Her chest burned, muscles screaming, but she pressed forward. She felt alive in a way that terrified her, alive because every decision carried weight, every choice meant survival. The lieutenant yelled, pointing to a side exit that led to a broken bridge. That's our way out. Alina looked. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a single vehicle, and the bridge had gaps, crumbling edges. But it was the only route left. She moved first, covering the child with her body as she scouted the path. Every step measured, every glance precise. The sergeant followed, reluctantly, trusting her judgment despite every instinct screaming that she might be reckless. They advanced carefully, using debris for cover, moving the wounded along as fast as possible. The convoy tried to cut them off, but the narrow approach slowed them down. Then she saw it, the shadow at the far end of the bridge. A figure standing upright, arms raised slightly, signaling the convoy. Her stomach sank. Someone was coordinating this ambush. They weren't random soldiers. They weren't chaotic fighters. They were orchestrated, calculated. Her mind raced. How much time did they have before the convoy's heavy vehicles reached the bridge? How far could the child be carried safely? How many of them would survive if the enemy pushed forward? She tightened her jaw, inhaled sharply, and made the call. Split formation. Ramirez with me. Keep the wounded in the center, push fast, cover each other. No heroics outside the plan. The lieutenant hesitated. You're asking for a lot. She cut him off, voice sharp. I'm asking for survival, and if you doubt it, watch closely." The child stirred again, small fingers clutching her sleeve. She whispered, "I'm scared." Alina's chest tightened. She pressed a reassuring hand to the girl's back. "I know," she murmured. "I know, but we're going to be okay." The first vehicle reached the base of the bridge. Sparks flew as it scraped against the crumbling edges. Bullets thudded off concrete. She moved, instinct screaming, heart hammering. Precision, timing, coordination. Every move deliberate, every choice calculated. They reached the first gap. Alina leapt, carrying the child in one arm, rifle in the other. The bridge shuddered beneath her weight. Dust rained down. The sergeant followed with wounded in tow. Ramirez covered their rear, firing with controlled bursts, moving with the rhythm of experience and trust. The convoy tried to advance, but the narrow bridge slowed them. Her team pressed forward, every step a victory, every breath a defiance. By the time they reached the other side, the convoy was stalled. The enemy scrambled, frustrated, outmaneuvered by a squad they had assumed would break under pressure. Alina's chest heaved, lungs burning, muscles screaming, but she felt the weight of defiance settle into something heavier, something resolute. The child looked up at her, eyes wide, trust unbroken. And for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe. She realized then that surviving wasn't just about staying alive. It was about carrying hope, protecting the fragile, defying despair when the world demanded obedience. The field had turned red, but her spirit remained unscarred. And in that moment, standing over the fractured bridge, watching the enemy scramble and falter, she understood the truth she had carried all along. Defiance, when guided by conscience, could be stronger than any weapon. How do you measure courage when the cost is everything? Alina crouched on the edge of the field, the wind tugging at her hair, the dust of a dozen battles clinging to her uniform. Around her, the remnants of the mission moved cautiously, each footstep deliberate, eyes scanning for threats that might never come. The convoy had retreated. The enemy was contained, disoriented, their precision broken by her decisions, by the team's unwavering, desperate coordination. And yet, the silence that followed was heavier than any firefight, heavier than the rubble, heavier than the moment she pulled the child from debris and risked it all. She looked down at the girl, asleep again, head resting against Alina's shoulder. Small, fragile, a life she had chosen to protect. Her chest tightened. The weight of defiance had grown heavier with each choice, but so had the quiet victory of survival, of humanity preserved. The sergeant approached, his face softer than it had been hours ago. He knelt beside her, voice low but firm. "You carried more than I thought possible, more than I deserved to see. You risked everything and somehow it worked." Alina didn't answer immediately. She wanted to, but the words felt too hollow. How could she explain the mixture of fear, guilt, and resolve that coursed through her? She swallowed, letting the silence carry her reply. Ramirez joined them, shoulders heavy, eyes reflecting both exhaustion and awe. "We're lucky," he said simply. "That's all I can call it." She shook her head, small, almost imperceptible. "No, we made our own luck." The lieutenant arrived next, hesitating as he approached the edge of the field. His uniform was stained, his face drawn, but his eyes carried something unspoken. Respect, maybe understanding, maybe a begrudging admiration. "Captain," he said, voice quiet, "I misjudged. Not the strategy, not entirely, but the courage, the humanity." Alina nodded once. She didn't say she had always known the cost of choices. She didn't say she had always known the path would be lonely. She simply carried it forward. Around them, the field was quiet. The horizon glimmered with the faint gold of approaching dawn. Birds stirred somewhere beyond the ruined buildings, hesitant, as if even nature was wary of the aftermath. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight settle. Every decision she had made, every risk she had taken, every life she had saved or could not save, it all pressed down. And yet she felt a strange lightness too. Survival had given her clarity. Humanity had given her purpose. Defiance had given her strength. The child stirred again, small fingers curling around her uniform. Elena looked down and smiled softly, the first real smile in hours. She whispered, "You're safe now, I promise." The sergeant exhaled sharply, hands on his knees. "It's over for now." But Elena knew better. The war wasn't over, the field might never truly be quiet. Battles would come again. Choices would demand blood, sweat, courage, and fear. Yet she also knew something deeper. The weight she carried wasn't just duty. It was conscience. It was life. Her thoughts drifted to her brother. She remembered his words, the letter folded in her pack. Carry it no matter how heavy. And now she understood. Carrying wasn't weakness. Carrying was defiance. Carrying was hope. Carrying was proof that even when the world demanded obedience, one could still act with humanity. She rose slowly, placing the child gently on the ground, letting her take tentative steps. Each movement the girl made was a reminder that life persisted, that choice persisted, that courage persisted. The sergeant followed her gaze. "She'll make it," he said quietly. "Yes," Elena replied, "because we chose it." The team gathered around her, the quiet strength of survivors binding them in ways words could not. There were no accolades, no applause, no cheering. Only the silent acknowledgement of endurance, of defiance, of the unspoken promise that they would carry what had happened forward. Not just the wounds, but the lessons, the humanity, the courage. Elena's eyes swept across the horizon again. The sun broke fully over the edge of the city, illuminating dust, rubble, and scarred streets. The field had turned red. It always would, but her spirit remained unscarred. She stepped forward, carrying both memory and resolve, leaving the field behind but taking its lessons with her. Behind her, the team followed, each step echoing the quiet defiance she had carried since the beginning. And in that moment she realized something essential. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She glanced down at the child one last time, who now walked steadily, small but determined. Elena allowed herself a quiet exhale. The field remained scarred. The world remained harsh. But she walked away with something stronger than fear, stronger than pain, stronger than the chaos of orders and battles. She walked away with the knowledge that choice, courage, and humanity could survive even when everything else seemed lost. As they disappeared into the first rays of sunlight, the dust rising behind them like a halo, Elena felt it settle deep in her chest. The quiet certainty that she had acted, that she had lived, that she had carried the weight of defiance without breaking. The field had turned red, and she had walked through it, unscarred in spirit, heavy with loss, full of purpose, and finally free. The sun climbed higher. A bird took flight, hesitant at first, then soaring, and somewhere in the distance the city stirred. Elena didn't look back. Not because she didn't remember, not because she didn't grieve, but because she knew something simple, something enduring. Some battles were fought in silence, some victories carried no applause, and sometimes the strongest act of courage was simply to walk forward, fully alive, fully human, fully unbroken.